Only with such words can I associate the murder of the 22-year-old girl, Elizabeth Short. You see, she was literally cut in half, and on her face, from ear to ear, they carved what was supposed to resemble a smile. Dozens of people confessed to the attack on the girl. The son accused his father of murder, while an investigator pointed to a renowned newspaper's representative. This case is gruesome, but very, very interesting. And my dears, this is definitely scary. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a young mother went out for a walk with her child. The woman was enjoying the quiet of Los Angeles, which was really hard to catch at any other time of day. She and her child strolled leisurely through Limerick Park's sparse neighborhood. While planning her day, she suddenly became lost in thought. Her attention was drawn to something lying on the side of the road. That something looked like a mannequin. Its limbs were twisted unnaturally, frozen in place. But step by step, as she approached the find, the woman realized it was a human body in front of her. And it was definitely not plastic used for displaying clothes. There really was a naked girl's body lying on the side of the road. It was cut in half right at the waist with astonishing, almost surgical precision. The internal organs were removed. Chunks of flesh were cut from the thighs and chest. There were no nipples, no genitals. The face was badly beaten and slashed. But the most striking thing was the cut, a gruesome smile that went from one ear to the other. A cement bag with traces of blood was lying nearby. The murdered girl was likely transported here in it. As you know, detectives made this assumption after the woman who found the body called them to the crime scene.
She was lying face up, a few inches from the sidewalk, a little north of the middle of the block. Her blue eyes were open, her arms above her head, elbows bent at a right angle, knees straight, legs spread apart, and flies were buzzing around her body.
Excerpt from a Los Angeles Times article. When the coroner examined the body, he recorded the official cause of death: severe bleeding from lacerations on the face and shock from multiple blows to the head. It is known that a crime is best solved while the trail is still hot, because then the perpetrator likely hasn't had time to hide or cover their tracks. But there was a problem. The police had no idea who the victim could be. Moreover, there was simply no hope for her quick identification. The mutilated body couldn't be shown to the public. The cops knew that even if they released the photos, the public wouldn't recognize the woman, so they decided to act differently. At the morgue, they took the victim's fingerprints, and a local newspaper provided an artist who created a reconstruction of the woman's face. It was a drawing based on physical features to help identify the murdered woman, so the image of the unknown girl was distributed through the press. The fingerprints were immediately sent to the FBI headquarters in Washington. Dear ones, remember we're talking about 1947, long before instant answers existed. Delivery and analysis would have taken days. Fortunately for the police, the newspaper employee had a good head on his shoulders. He suggested an unconventional solution: to use a new technology, the sound photo machine. It's kind of an early version of a fax machine, used to send fingerprints immediately, and it worked. A few hours later, the FBI identified the murdered woman as Elizabeth Short using fingerprints from their database. A girl who once applied for a job at the military base in California, and the one who had already come to the attention of the police for underage drinking. So now the case had a name, but there were still no answers. Information about the unprecedentedly brutal murder, I remind you, was already available to the media. While the police were deciding how best to proceed, the journalists acted immediately. Reporters called Elizabeth Short's mother. They claimed that her daughter had won a beauty contest. The thing is, at that time, the police had not yet informed the family about the tragic news. Instead, her mother knew that Elizabeth had been dreaming of becoming an actress for years, so her participation in the beauty contest didn't seem strange. Taking advantage of the woman's trust, the journalists got all the details about Elizabeth from her. Only then did they reveal the truth. Her daughter had been murdered and dismembered, and left by the side of the road. I don't even know how to comment on the actions of such journalists. Nothing more to add. This is messed up. Naturally, the sensational article succeeded. But at what cost? By the way, it was the journalists who nicknamed Elizabeth Short the Black Dahlia. Newspapers often named high-profile criminal cases back then. Pretty much like true crime videos nowadays. The death of Elizabeth, which was extremely brutal and public, immediately became the center of attention. The day after Short's body was found, the local newspaper Los Angeles Examiner recorded record sales, the highest since the end of World War II. At first, the press tried to call the crime the werewolf murder, but that name didn't stick. Journalists soon learned about the informal nickname circulating among Short's acquaintances. On January 17, 1947, the term Black Dahlia appeared in several publications, including the Herald Express and Los Angeles Daily News. Black Dahlia is a kind of allusion to the popular film of that time, The Blue Dahlia. The plot of the film, let's say, doesn't match what happened to Elizabeth, but it sounded poetic and that was enough. In reality, the Blue Dahlia became black because of Elizabeth's dark hair, her love for black clothing, and the rumors that surrounded her mysterious figure. One way or another, the public liked that nickname. For the next month, the case didn't leave the front pages. For 31 days in a row, the Los Angeles Record published materials about the murder. Headline after headline, the name Black Dahlia became linked to Elizabeth Short. Can this be considered fame? Well, basically, probably yes. The only pity is that the girl gained it posthumously and in such a terrible way. I don't say pity for nothing. You see, Elizabeth dreamed of being popular. She wanted to become an actress for years. But doing that with her, let's say, starting opportunities was difficult. The murdered person's family didn't stand out from others. A mother, father, and 5 children lived in suburban Boston. They owned a house, a car, and planned for the future. Until the stock market crash happened in 1929. Elizabeth's father, then 6 years old, lost all his savings. Then shortly after that, he disappeared without a trace. The man's car was later found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge, leading people to assume he had taken his own life. Either way, the family was left without a man, without support and without answers. In 1942, Phoebe Short received a letter from the man who had been considered dead for over 10 years. It turned out that her husband was alive and had simply run away and started a new life. Of course, the letter contained apologies, but is it even necessary to say that situations like this have a bit of an impact? People's mental health. At 18, Elizabeth even tried to reconnect with her deadbeat father, but nothing came of it. The girl even lived with him for a while, but she quickly gave up on that idea, and since then she never stayed in one place for long. It's unclear what happened with her father, but things clearly didn't work out. Later on, the girl was often seen in the company of men. In one of the police reports on her case, the following would later be written:
She knew at least 50 men at the time of her death, and at least 25 men had seen her within 60 days before that death. She was known as a tease to men.
Some people spread false rumors that Short was a prostitute, while others baselessly claimed that she liked to tease men because she was a lesbian. There was no evidence. People just talked while the media sensationalized it. One source says Elizabeth's friends claimed love affairs changed her from an innocent girl to a criminal obsessed with men. That's a direct quote. Even in the internal police bulletin, she was described that way.
The subject was last seen on January 9, 1947, exiting a car at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She wore a black suit, collarless cardigan-style coat, white fluffy blouse, black suede heels, nylon stockings, white gloves, and a long beige coat. She had a black plastic handbag with her, 2 12x8 handles in which she kept a black address book. The subject easily makes friends with both genders and often visits cocktail bars and nightclubs. She exited the car, entered the Biltmore lobby, and was not seen there again.
Well, basically, in that case, the likely motive for the attack suggests itself. One man got jealous of the girl because of another, and Elizabeth's body was found on the side of the road. Or one of the men she had an affair with found out about her cheating, and Elizabeth's body was found on the side of the road. And so on in the same vein. Let me remind you, you understand my train of thought, but there's one hairy but. What kind of relationships did she have with men? It's unclear. For example, only a few of Elizabeth's romantic relationships are known for certain, at least ones that could be considered serious. In 1945, during World War II, Short met Major Mr. Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. The man was an officer in the United States Army Air Forces. Gordon took part in combat operations in China, Burma, and India. After an injury, he returned to the United States for short-term recovery, and that's when his relationship with Elizabeth began. They didn't see each other often, mostly communicating through letters. Major Gordon wrote her letters in which he described his feelings and hopes for the future, their future together. Apparently, later he even proposed to her, and Elizabeth accepted. She informed her friends about the engagement, and it seemed she finally had hope for a happy life. At least more or less the way she imagined it. But the happiness turned out to be short-lived. No, her husband didn't cheat, didn't run away, nothing like that. He died while serving in India. The news of his death was a heavy blow for Elizabeth. She kept his letters, photographs, and mementos. She kept them as the greatest treasure in her life. She really had a hard time going through it. Despite Gordon's family denying any serious relationship or engagement with Elizabeth, this still happened. The girls' next relationships were less romantic and much more like the kind where you might look for a motive for murder. In July? In 1946, Elizabeth Short returned to Los Angeles with a specific goal: to meet Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling, an old acquaintance. Their relationship was complicated, marked by uncertain attachment and a sense of alienation. The man, it seems, did not hide his irritation at her open, flirtatious manner, but he did not disappear from Short's life either. Sometimes they were close, other times distant. Shortly before her death, he even sent her $100. At the time, that was a significant amount, showing his connection with her wasn't completely over. In December of 1946, just a few weeks before her mysterious death, the woman suddenly disappeared from Los Angeles. She went to San Diego without explaining any reasons to anyone she knew. She only said she was afraid. Of what? It's unknown. In San Diego, she met a young woman named Dorothy French and gave her shelter in her family's home. Elizabeth confessed to her that she was hiding and that her ex-boyfriend scared her. Moreover, she was afraid that he would find her. A few weeks later, 2 men and a woman came to the house. They were looking for Elizabeth. When she heard about it, Elizabeth reacted instantly. She got scared, panicked, and refused to come out. The visitors eventually left, but peace did not return. Elizabeth decided to leave this house. Next was Robert Menley, whom everyone called Red. The man worked as a salesman and had a family, but that didn't stop him from starting a new relationship. Menley's role is extremely interesting in the story of Elizabeth's murder, as he was one of the last people to see her alive. Menley brought the girl to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Elizabeth said she was waiting for her sister. In the hotel lobby, she sat down, and Red said goodbye. But according to him, he stayed with her in the room that night. He supposedly lay down on the bed and she silently sat in the chair. They hardly spoke. The next day, Elizabeth vanished. By the way, her sister Virginia later reported that no meeting had been planned. The Biltmore Hotel is one of the key locations in Elizabeth's story. It was in the hotel lobby where Short was last seen alive. That was when she was meeting with Manley. She made several phone calls. Those who saw her that day noticed. With each phone call, the woman's condition was getting worse. She was nervous, panicking, searching for something or someone. Around 10 p.m., she left the hotel. The next few days were emptiness, complete emptiness. Officer Myrle McBride reported that on January 14, a woman approached her. She was frightened, crying, and hysterical. She said that she was being threatened with murder. McBride escorted her to the bar where she had left her purse. But the man who had threatened her was gone. Later that evening, Ms. McBride saw her again. Elizabeth was leaving the bar with 2 men and a woman. She seemed calmer, and the officer simply noted the moment. But that was the very night that became Elizabeth's last. Just hours later, her body was found in Leimert Park. In general, the last months of Elizabeth Short's life in Los Angeles were something of a puzzle. It was a mosaic of moving and brief acquaintances. She often changed addresses and jobs if she had any. Men remembered her smile, her delicate posture, the short evenings spent together. They invited her on dates, gave her gifts, but no one could say who she really was. She never talked about it, not to her neighbors, nor to those who considered themselves close to her. Former officer Vince Carter, who handled the Short attack case, said the following.
She had no visible signs of employment. She could live for weeks without money, and then suddenly funds would appear.
Bartenders, hotel workers, neighbors, everyone said the same thing. Elizabeth seemed reclusive, cautious. She seemed distrustful of everyone. But what about the investigation and evidence? Overall, everything was just as bleak as the last months of Short's life. The official investigation lasted for 3 years, until 1950. During this time, the police received dozens of tips, statements, and even false confessions. But every lead eventually hit a dead end. In 1949, growing dissatisfaction led a grand jury to investigate the Los Angeles Police Department's ineffective homicide division. Elizabeth Short's death was included in this hearing. Detective Harry Hansen testified before the jury. He was one of those who had been working on the case since the very first days. In his sworn testimony, he expressed his conviction. The crime was committed by a doctor or someone with medical training, as the precision showed in his view. The surgical accuracy could not have been accidental. After the session, the investigation resumed. The detectives again questioned friends, family, acquaintances, and suspects. They asked roughly the same questions as before, but no new leads emerged. They heard and saw the same things. By the way, some suspects remained under investigation until their death. One was nightclub owner Mark Hansen, an acquaintance of Short. He appeared in numerous testimonies from many people, but no convincing evidence against him was ever found. One of those who worked tirelessly on the case was Detective Harry Hansen. Just think about it, for 23 years he tried to find the killer. In '68, just before retiring, he confessed.
I only regret that I never solved the murder of Elizabeth Short.
But among all the names connected to this case, one gradually emerged as the most likely: Dr. George Hodel. This gentleman was a gynecologist with a clinic in Los Angeles. He was well known in the city's upper circles. He often hosted parties for the wealthy and famous, and according to rumors, he might have had a connection with Elizabeth Short. In '49, he came to the attention of the police. He was arrested on suspicion of sexually assaulting his own teenage daughter. Even though he was acquitted at that time, Hodel was officially mentioned for the first time as a suspect in the Black Dahlia case. The police even wiretapped his house. The recordings captured a number of disturbing statements. One time, this man said the following:
Suppose I really did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. Killed her. Maybe I really did kill my secretary.
It was about Ruth Spolgen, who died in 1945. Later, Hodel left the United States and moved to the Philippines, where he lived for the next 40 years. His name disappeared from the public eye until his son, Steve Hodel, decided to start his own investigation. Steve is a former detective. He began investigating a murder connected to his father. But after George Hodel's death in 1999, among his father's personal belongings, the man found a photo of a woman who looked remarkably like Elizabeth Short. This photo sparked years of searching. During his research, Steve found several pieces of evidence. He found 5 newspaper articles suggesting his father might have dated Short. He also found out that George Hodel had formal surgical training. Together with a handwriting expert, Steve compared handwritten letters sent to one of the newspapers in 1947. He found a significant similarity to his father's handwriting. An additional piece of evidence was a receipt for the purchase of cement bags, the same kind as the empty bag found near Short's body and not that long ago. In 2018, he discovered a 70-year-old letter from a former police informant who wrote that Elizabeth was killed by a man named J. Ike. The Los Angeles police reviewed the collected materials but decided not to reopen the case. Steve believed that his father had connections with officers and that they could have protected him. Despite this, some members of law enforcement still took Steve's version seriously.
I told Steve that if his father were still alive, I would have charged him with murder. His testimony was very convincing. Deputy District Attorney of Los Angeles, Steve K.
But there is also another modern version of who could have attacked Elizabeth Short. In 2017, British writer Pugh Eatwell claimed that she had uncovered one of the biggest mysteries of the 20th century. She published the book Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. She presented her account of the events, stating that Leslie Dillon was Short's killer, according to Eatwell. A bellhop who was briefly considered a suspect but was eventually released. The writer says Dillon wasn't alone. According to her version, he killed Elizabeth at the request of Mark Hansen, a local nightclub and movie theater owner who was connected to Dillon through work and possibly some personal ties. Eatwell thinks Hansen had the motive. Short stayed at his house for days. It is known that he was one of the last people who spoke to her on the phone. On January 8, 1947, Itwell claimed that Henson was courting Elizabeth, but she rejected his attention. After being rejected, Itwell speculated Hansen wanted to get rid of the girl. He couldn't do it himself and turned to Dylan, knowing that he had a tendency toward violence. Dylan had previously worked at a funeral home. This gave him the skills he would need to know how to dispose of a body. During the investigation, it turned out that he knew details of the crime that had not been made public. For example, he knew all about the rose tattoo on Short's thigh. The same one police say was found cut out and inserted into her vagina. Dylan explained his knowledge simply. He claimed he was writing a crime novel and researching the case, but no charges were ever brought against him. Itwell said this happened because of Hansen's ties to corrupt police officers. The writer believed that it was Hansen who used his connections to silence the investigation. He may have been protecting both Dylan and himself. During her research, Itwell came across another detail that, in her opinion, confirmed this very version. It was about the Astor Motel, a small complex with 10 cabins near the University of Southern California. Motel owner Henry Hoffman recalled the morning of January 15. In 1947, he opened a room to a horrifying sight. Everything was covered in blood and feces. In another cabin, he found a bundle of women's clothes wrapped in brown paper, also covered in blood. Instead of telling the police, Hoffman stayed silent. A few days earlier, he had already been arrested for beating his wife and he didn't want to risk it again. Another run-in with the law. According to Itwell, it was in the motel that Elizabeth was killed. Some events before her death occurred, and several witnesses saw a woman who looked like her at the motel. Despite these facts, Itwell's version did not become official, but she herself remains convinced of her conclusions. But Itwell's version is not the last one I'll tell you about. You see, in 2006, Donald Wolfe published the book The Mafia, the Magnet, and the Murder That Shocked Los Angeles. In the book, he put forward a bold hypothesis. Elizabeth was killed by a gangster, someone named Baxi Siegel, and not of his own will, but at the request of the Los Angeles Times publisher, Norman Chandler. Chandler allegedly had an affair with her, got her pregnant, and chose to silence her permanently. Wolfe says that in 1940s Los Angeles, a hit like that wasn't unbelievable. The police had long become a tool in the hands of the powerful and wealthy. In 1995, there was another version, even more disturbing. Janice Knowlton, in her book Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer, wrote the murder was a city tragedy and a personal trauma for her. She was 10 years old when, according to her, she saw her father, George Knowlton, kill Elizabeth Short with a hammer and then forced his daughter to go with him to get rid of the body. As you know, whether this actually happened hasn't been proven. But Janice's memories added to the endless cycle of assumptions, pain, and speculation. The real name, Elizabeth Short, gradually became a symbol of both tragedy and mystery. Her story inspired many. In 1987, writer James Elroy, whose own mother was brutally murdered, published the novel Black Dahlia. There, he mixed real events with fictional characters. In 2006, the novel was adapted into a film by Brian De Palma. Mia Kirshner played Elizabeth. The case was also referenced in other works. John Gregory Dunn wrote True Confessions, and in 2011 this story was featured in the series American Horror Story. Despite thousands of unsolved crimes in Los Angeles, Short's death remains one of the most famous. She became something of a symbol of the dark side of post-war America. Even Time magazine included this murder in its list of the most famous unsolved cases in the world. Elizabeth Short is buried in Oakland at Mountain View Cemetery. The grave is quiet and modest. It just has her name and her birth and death dates. And the rest are prices, speculations, books, names that will never give a final answer.